seen Carley was on ABC quite a while ago about this first commercial spaceport in Northern Territory. Nullarbor. And I was super impressed. So without me trying to preempt what Carley's going to tell us and how she got on this journey, let me introduce Carley Simon. Carley. I am pretty old.
Thanks very much. I've been upgraded. I can sing and dance. So I'm Carley Scott. I'm the CEO of Equatorial Launch Australia. We're developing a commercial spaceport in the Northern Territory of Australia, and today I'll be speaking to you about what we're doing, but also about space and how it's been changing for Australia in particular. We'll have some time at the end for questions and discussion, so hopefully you've got your pens at the ready and you've got some things to say to me through the session. Thanks so much for taking the time to come and see me present today. I'm pretty excited to talk to you about this topic. When you talk about space, it is inspiring, it is fun, and it's got a long history, and it's something that we always reflect on, that history, where we've come from, and the things that we've learned from that history as well. So as we go into this presentation and we start to look at space and Australia's role in space and what we're doing, I just thought I'd touch on for a second something that was one of the really inspiring moments that most people have some memory of. It might be what they were doing at the time, who they were with, or what they really felt when they saw the landing on the moon. So can I just see a show of hands of people who have a memory of that when they saw it? And keep your hand up there if you felt something, if you were inspired. That's good news, I'm glad to hear that. Alright, so next slide please, and this should be a bit of a relive moment that we can have a look at that landing again.
12, 11, 10, 9, ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine
So we'll cut it there, but that's some of the original footage that you remember seeing, and that leap by mankind, that step by mankind, was such a huge initiative. The number of people that were behind that initiative is just astonishing. And as you know, when you achieve something that's really of note, there are so many people that go into that and so many endeavours that are unseen to get to a really spectacular moment like this. Now, when we go to the space sector today, what you'll normally see is, in the next slide after this, one more please.
ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Much more one click. Perfect, thank you. So you go to space in 2020 or even recently in the past few years, and you'll hear Richard Branson is looking to take people into space. You can be a space tourist. No longer do you have to study engineering, maths and go to school for a long time and learn how to be a fine artist at flying a spacecraft. Everyday people like you and I, well, you may be much more spectacular than I, but everyday people are able to then jump onto a spacecraft with Richard Branson and go to space. Well, that's the vision that he's got. And that's what you'll hear about quite often, space tourism and the opportunity for people to go above the carbon line. And then you'll see, thank you, pictures like this, which is a little bit matted to swords, but this is a real picture of Richard with very, very attractive people wearing very funky spacesuits, because that's what you'll get to wear as a commercial tourist going into space these days. The other sorts of images that you see are this magnificently large rocket going into space. And we look at the commercial enterprises coming around this, which is a big change from the government enterprise that was in years gone by. And you've got people like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, spending over $1 billion a year developing their rockets for commercial enterprise to go to space. And these are huge, huge endeavours. And they're spending that money and investigating space as a commercial prospect for a good reason. If you look at the global market for space, it is a $300 to $400 billion market. For us, we're focused on a little portion down here, which is around launch for space, and it's around the $5 billion mark per annum. It is growing at a compound annual growth rate of about 15%. This is a huge opportunity that is growing internationally, and it's getting a lot of attention in Australia as well. Thank you. And you always say, well, it's not rocket science. Well, in this case it is, but actually we're involved in this rocket science every day ourselves. Now, on the way here today, I was with my mum, Jan, thank you very much for driving me, who had put into her GPS the coordinates to make sure we got to your new venue, which is lovely. And using that GPS is using satellite technology. That's where we're getting the information from. When you get out your mobile phone and you're communicating on your mobile phone, when you go to the ATM, you're using satellite communications. And most people day-to-day don't realise how involved they are day-to-day with the space sector. Now, this just gives you that image once again. We've got the satellites that are often orbiting Earth and beaming back this information straight back down. We see the mining sector as well benefiting from this space industry. They're putting that GPS technology into their huge mining trucks and having automated vehicles, so they're more specific. And same in agriculture. The CSIRO has listed that Australian agriculture could increase its yield by up to 50% by using GPS and precision navigation. I probably won't because it's a little bit too heavy on the land, but that gives you an idea of why the space sector is so increasingly valuable to a range of other day-to-day industries and why it's growing so fast. And it does touch us so easily day-to-day in ways that we don't realise. When you look at these sorts of images that we all love to see of astronauts floating through space, and you see the shield that he's looking through or she's looking through, and it's a scratch-proof glass. So anyone that's wearing glasses like I am that have scratch-proof glass there, you're also benefiting from space technologies that have been brought back down to Earth. And so what we're talking about now is not just big rockets that go bang. It's not just seeing someone land on the moon. It is a whole range of industries day to day that impact our lives, that are growing and linked to space, and that space technologies are helping. Thanks very much. Next slide. And I thought I'd mention this because I noticed in your newsletter that one of the other practical applications of space ties to something that you had a presentation about recently with BlazeAid. And we all know about the stories in Australia recently with climate change and bushfires and some of the natural disasters that have hit us. Now, some of the other technologies in space that are helping to try and understand the impacts of climate change and natural disasters include the use of satellites. This is an image of NASA satellites FireSat. So 200 satellites using infrared technology to scan the Earth, spot a fire within 15 minutes of it starting, where it is between 30 and 50 foot wide, and being able to then alert authorities and enable a full planning process around how we go about handling those natural disasters. We also have space medicine. Now, someone emailed me recently and they said, have you heard about what we're doing with antiviral polymer nanoworms? Of course I've heard that. I had no idea. They were kind enough to explain to me that in medicine, so traditionally in space you're looking after astronaut health and wanting to make sure that astronauts are healthy to be able to do their job. But a lot of the technology and space medicine that's being looked at today is actually looking to see how different chemical bonds can be formed in space in low gravity and then strengthen chemicals, drugs, medicines that we use here on Earth. So those antiviral polymer nanoworms were actually an approach to cure cancer. So there's a polymer nanoworm, a little string that's injected into your body and finds the cancer. Now the theory was if you get that into a microgravity space, that might be strengthened and be able to do that job more effectively. Now this complex picture here, you don't have to read all of the bits and pieces on it, is just that extra step. So we're talking about practical things that really make sense here. I'm using the phone, I understand that that's practical to you. But one of the things that's been looked at as well is to say, well, there are only so many resources we have on Earth, so is there an opportunity for us to look to space and see that we can harness the resources that are in space and in asteroids? Now, the asteroids they have a particular focus on are called C-type asteroids. They have two very important ingredients. One of them is hydrogen and one of them is oxygen. So if you're able to mine that asteroid and get a hold of that, those sort of materials, then you're able to produce water, you're able to produce fuels, rocket fuels actually. But one of the challenges there, you think about mining today, as a nation, we're a very strong nation in the mining sector. But one of the challenges there is that when you grab a hold of some earth, normally, you're using forces. There's a presumption that this will stay fairly stable if you drive something into it. When you go to space and you go to these asteroids, they're often just fragments that are held together really loosely by microgravity. It might be 100 times weaker than the gravity that we have here on Earth. So if you grab a hold of a piece of asteroid and you try and mine it and you try and put a force into it, it's just going to move away. You're not going to really have any force to push against. That's a real problem. So how do we then make the most of this resource that's in space? Well, this is one of the many ideas, and it's quite interesting. So you've basically got a foil here that's able to focus a solar beam, and you get sunlight concentrated being pushed down into the asteroid. So instead of mining it with a physical item, you're mining it with light, which breaks down the asteroid into its component parts. And you capture those component parts, and then you have in theory hydrogen and oxygen. You have a fuel, you have a life source in water. Now, it's not just a wild theory. This sort of thing is being tested in laboratories at the moment. Japan is also looking at asteroid mining and actively putting out explorations into space to begin this activity. So taking a step back for a moment about all these grand things that are happening in the space sector and having a look at what's happening in Australia. Thank you. The Australian Space Agency was formed recently and notes that, you know what, mining is an opportunity. We're strong as a nation in mining. And also the space sector really creates so many efficiencies in so many other sectors, particularly sectors that we're already strong in, agriculture being one of those. So perhaps as a nation we'll focus on space. And in that vein, there were some priorities that were brought into the Space Agency to really focus on. The one that I'm most interested in, won't be any surprise to you, is just here, access to space. So we're getting around to the part about Boy. Thanks very much. And just as a positioning piece for you, we've been active in space. I mean, you know that we beamed the vision of the moon landing, but we're still active in space. But we are relatively fairly small. So at $350 billion, it's a good size, but when you compare it to the global space industry and the growth of the space industry that is targeted to be to $1 trillion as an industry by 2040, Australia's fairly small and fairly new. So how do we get from where we are to where we could be? Next slide, thank you. And that's the challenge that we've got. I mean, realistically, there are, the Bezoses of the world, people who put $1 billion into their company a year and be just fine to continue doing that, to keep exploring. How does Australia grow to see that we can challenge in this space? What is it that we can specialise in and be competitive within? Now, that image that you just saw with the big dog and little dog around things being smaller, you know what, smaller isn't always bad. When you look at the space industry itself, we're moving from, yourselves with all the technology you use, it's getting smaller and smaller, and that's what you're seeing here. So a satellite here on the left, sort of NBN style satellite, you're looking at about a truck size, really heavy, really big, really expensive to make, and it takes a long time to make as well. Moving forward to cube satellites, which we commonly have today. So you can get satellites that are about the size of a microwave. example, doing a heck of a lot of work and being very effective in the functions that we're looking at today. Now what that means, and the reason I'm pointing out to this miniaturisation, is because if your payloads or your satellites are getting smaller and smaller, then what happens to the rest of your infrastructure? Do you need Cape Canaveral now to be an active player in space? I think you might have guessed the answer. I've put this picture up here just as a mark in history. So we've had small rockets before. We looked at some of the big ones earlier. This is from Canada, and actually before the moon landing, Canada was investigating rockets themselves, solid fuel rockets, and this one's called a black brand. Now it's a particular note because the black brand ended up being one of the most effective and reliable launch vehicles that's been made. 98% success rate. Really effective vehicle. Now this vehicle as a black brand is also known as a sounding rocket. Do we have anyone that's in a marine kind of endeavour or passionate about being on the water? And if you do, okay. When you take a sounding, not to put you on the spot or anything, what's a sounding?
Yes.
Depth.
Yeah, that was the most efficient answer I've ever heard in my life. Thank you. It is when you drop down a rope and you check the depth of where you are. Now, that terminology is being taken and applied to space and these rockets. So these rockets are testing rockets. They're research rockets that take scientific payloads into space. And we'll come back to why that's important in just a second. Well, actually, right now, this is a launch site with that smaller technology. We're looking at NASA Wallops in the USA. Now, no longer are you having this huge infrastructure demand when you get that sounding rocket that we're just looking at. It's about 15 metres tall. You can put it on a launch rail and have fairly simple infrastructure around it. So you're starting to see this smaller scale just here in this image. I'll show you in just a minute what that looks like when it launches, but just so you're positioned in this, you've got a launch rail that holds onto that rocket. This is the rocket just here, and let's have a look at what it looks like when the sounding rocket fires off.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
Thanks very much. So it's a crack of thunder as a sound. Really, really quick, and I mean there's years of work that goes into that launch. I mean it's done in the blink of an eye. And I was actually at a launch at NASA about a year ago. It's a bigger rocket that I was watching. I was on the bus and there were all these scientists there who had their payloads or their gear on the rocket. And some of them have been working 25, 45 years. The pinnacle of their professional lives was getting their equipment onto the rocket that I saw that day. And in a similar, it was probably 3 or 4 minutes that we got to see that rocket because it was larger. But that's what you see as a visual part as a community. Someone spent 45 years working to perfect something to go to space, and I see it for about 3 minutes. I like seeing this, I do. So what you just saw there was a launch rail. So sensitive. Thank you. A launch rail there with a rocket on, and if you're being really crude, you might have a rocket that has a fuel source down the bottom, the payload up in the middle section here, and a nose cone to help guide it. And what you're seeing with sounding rockets in particular is that they don't just go off into space and never be seen again. They go in an arc. When you get to about 100 kilometres, that's the Kármán line, and that's what Australia defines as space. So once you're above 100 kilometres altitude, you're in space. And you might have 20 to 30 minutes altogether to undertake your scientific experiment. So it might be releasing a satellite. It might be hosting a telescope that looks out into the solar system to understand it better. And then you're seeing this parachute drop down of that payload back down to the ground, because ordinarily if you're doing those scientific experiments, the equipment that you've got on board is really expensive and really, really valuable. So you want it to land really gently, which is a great thing for us as far as the environment is concerned as well. So that's what you were seeing just there, and that is what we are doing in the Northern Territory. Thank you. Pardon me. So I was talking to someone just before, and they said, well, why Australia? What is it that makes anywhere in Australia actually a good spot for launch? So we'll have a look at that as well, and Keith, do keep me in line with time because I can speak about this forever.
That's all right.
Now this is an image from the Northern Territory, East Arnhem, where I spent 3 years living, in preparation for what is now the development of a commercial spaceport to launch those rockets that you just saw. And it is a beautiful location, as you can see here. If you like fishing, it's the place to be. And there is a tremendous Indigenous culture, living culture, over 60,000 years of continuous living culture in East Arnhem Land. Let's keep having a look a little bit deeper. Next slide, please. So why Australia generally? Now these are some of the active spaceports around the world. The bigger the circle, the more they launch. If it's got a bit of a yellowy orange colour around the outside of the circle, they also launch humans. We're not looking to do that in the near term here. But you can also see through here, this line. That's it, the equator. Okay, so why is the equator important? If you think about the Earth, it's fattest at the equator. The ground speed there is its fastest. And so when the Earth is spinning out to the east, the ground speed there is faster. So it throws your rocket off more quickly. And what that means is you need less fuel. So in that rocket you saw just before, you don't have to have as much fuel in it. You'll fill the rest with payload. So it's going to be a more efficient ride. Now if you're looking about 15 degrees either side of the equator, you're getting that benefit. The Arnhem Space Centre in the Northern Territory is at about 12 degrees. The other part that's really interesting to note through here is to say, well, where else then can you have competitive sites? Why is Australia one of the places that you continue to build that site? And one of the reasons is that we are a stable nation. We've got a strong economy, stable politics, great trading relationships, and that means that we are also a great trading nation for space. And getting access to this top half of Australia to be close to the equator is quite a challenge. Next slide, please. But if you looked at Australia or up and said, well, maybe we don't need to just be close to the equator. It's a global competitive advantage, but the space industry is growing so rapidly, you could launch from anywhere. Some of the other factors that come into it for you then are saying, well, let's look around Australia. If you're going to launch from anywhere, some of the things you consider are your risk profile. So if I'm going to fly over a major city, it's going to increase my risk profile. There are going to be less customers that want to launch with me because your insurance costs will be higher and your regulators are probably going to be a little bit less inclined to approve your launch. So you take it away from a major population base. You still want to have good access to infrastructure though. Away from major population bases, away from major industries that are going to say, well, you know, we don't want to stop the seaport transport route that we've got just to allow you to fly a rocket. We don't want to stop tourism to allow you to fly a rocket. Okay, well that narrows it down a little further. And what you find in the top right-hand tip of the Northern Territory, about 660 kilometres away from Darwin to the east, is a fantastically unique location. That is East Arnhem Land, that is where Nhulunbuy is. Not only are you close to the equator, you have a low population density to decrease your risk, low level of industry to decrease your risk once again. And if you look eastward, you're looking into the Gulf of Carpentaria there, in that gap between the Northern Territory and Queensland. And what's happening there? There are things that are happening there, but there are no oil and gas reserves or major reserves there. There's a lot less of a risk factor launching eastward from the Northern Territory. That's about 600 kilometres that you've got for your rocket to express itself without a huge amount of risk. And that is a huge, huge benefit. But not only that, in East Arnhem Land, Rio Tinto has been mining there for a number of decades. So they've developed a deep water port, a city-friendly airport, fibre optic cabling, and all of that within about 20 to 30 kilometres of the site itself. So all of a sudden you're looking at millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of built form that you can make use of. And that brings that site potentially decades ahead of other sites that would also be close to the equator that might consider themselves potential launch spots. So what you're seeing in site selection in the Northern Territory is a globally competitive opportunity. Next slide, please. Thank you. Let's have a little bit of a look at that site and the area. There should be a video.
Australia's Northern Territory is ideally placed to host key infrastructure and services for the global space industry, with competitive advantages in launch services for rockets and stratospheric ballooning, ground stations, and space technology development and testing. On track to commence operations in 2020, Equatorial Launch Australia's Arnhem Space Centre will be Australia's first commercial space launch facility, servicing government, research and commercial customers. Located just 12 degrees from the equator, launching from Arnhem Space Centre takes full advantage of the Earth's rotation to gain extra velocity, improving payload to fuel ratios. The facility will initially be equipped with 3 launch pads and accommodate suborbital and small orbital satellite launch vehicles, and its design allows for support of all current and future launch and recovery technologies. The launch facility.
So that's a bit of an insight into some of the planning that's been happening in East Arnhem Land to make this work. So we've got a great location, some really nice design drawings, and some discussions underway to see that we can launch from the Northern Territory, but what's happened since then? Now, I've put this Rubik's Cube up here because there are so many pieces that need to come together well to really see launch as an opportunity for Australia come to reality. Now for us, let's just touch on some of those. We talked about accessing land. Now you're on Aboriginal land, you're under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, and so there's a long statutory process to go through in getting access to the land. We started that process in about 2015. In about 2017, the statutory approval was provided with the Northern Land Council, the Minister and the local traditional owners agreeing that a launch site in the Northern Territory is something they could support. That was a huge hurdle to overcome. Some of the other hurdles that you're looking at in getting a launch site up will include your environmental approvals as well. Now, the rockets that we're looking at actually have a really, really small footprint, but we've never done that commercially in Australia before. So Equatorial Launch Australia has had to go through a new process with regulators. And it's a process of saying, well, what are you familiar with? What's best practice internationally? And how do we make the processes of best practice environmental care suit with old practices that are in place in Australian regulation system? It's been a very tricky process. Now that was one of those risks that was out of our hands and can kill a project. I'll come back to that in just a second. 2 other risks that might be interesting for anyone who's got an engineering background is around, or even if you've been interested in international trade. There are very strict regulations around international trade of things like rockets, and you can imagine why. So within those regulations, it's another instant kill for your project. If you're not able to transport one of those rockets from a country like America into Australia smoothly, then you don't have a go. Project's over. So that's another one we've had to look at, and I'll come back to it in just a second. And another one is around the risk profile. And we talked about risk being a really significant contributor to your consideration of everything you do with launch. We have to model very specifically what the flight profile will be, where the vehicle is likely to land, and what all the risks are associated with that, and every single step that can go wrong along the way, and talk to how we mitigate that. It's a long and expensive process with some really complex engineering and computing, and these are some of the things that we have to do to make sure we're operating as safely as possible. So how have those things gone? Where are we at as a business? Well, I'm happy to say to you that not only did we get the approval and lease to have a long-term lease on the land to be able to develop this site, we worked through regulations and are currently working through regulations around transport of goods into Australia. We've commenced clearing on the site because we have got our environmental approvals, and we are well on our way to being able to launch our first rockets in the Northern Territory. In fact, last week we had some people out from NASA who were training us in best practice. Our team is out on site this week looking at the clearing of the land and making sure all the assets will be positioned as you've seen in those pictures. Thank you, next slide please. And we're working our way to build a spaceport like what you've seen in an area that looks like this. So this is about 3 kilometres north-east of our site. It's called the Knowledge Centre, and every year about 2,000 people from around Australia come to the Garma Festival here, and it's advertised on ABC News. But what I wanted to show you here, other than the natural vegetation is what we're clearing and looking to build a spaceport with, is that you can see these stars laser cut into the building here. Now this building was established by the Gumatj Corporation. Gumatj Corporation representing the Gumatj people as one of the voices for the Gumatj people. And the reason I'm pointing out the stars is because we talked about this ancient culture and living culture. Now one of the stories of this ancient culture, or series of stories, is around the stars. We had some people in the community talk to us and say, well, one of the benefits of developing a spaceport here isn't actually just about launching rockets. It's because we've had stories of the stars for generations. And we used to sit around the campfire with our bellies facing the stars, teaching kids in part who they are through stories of the stars. And that's getting harder and harder to do with TV and video games and so forth. But with a spaceport coming along, kids are paying attention again. And we can combine our stories with these stories of what space can be going forward, which is a really interesting and unforeseen outcome for us. So we are working very, very closely with the traditional owners in East Arnhem Land. It's an ongoing process that we need to keep working at. But for example, the construction will be done by a local traditional owner group. We expect that land management and also the recovery of rockets will also be done by local rangers and local groups. There are real opportunities that this spaceport delivers, not just in scientific fields and endeavours, but very practical construction opportunities for people on the ground. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is Jawa Yunipingu, who is one of the board members of Gumatch Corporation, standing next to a very small solid fuel rocket, similar to the sounding rocket. Now in Queensland, they've been launching these rockets with university students, small ones, for over a decade. So they invited us to come out and see what it looks like. And it's a bit hard to see in this picture, but you've actually got some traditional owner design on the nose cone. It's the Seven Sisters and the story of the Seven Sisters that's on the nose cone of that rocket. So we'll continue to work with the local people so that we can build our understanding of what they want to get out of it, but also see what we can do to benefit the local community as we go forward. Thank you. The site that you were seeing just before, I thought I'd just draw this out again for you. Basically, to get it started, we talked about things getting smaller and a bit more simplistic. Now, for us to start, we can lay down one pad. We'll look to lay down 3 eventually, but one pad, some buildings up the top there, utilities, some fencing, and in a really crude sense, that's some of your basic infrastructure to commence the spaceport. So it's very achievable. And the fact that we've already cleared land, we've got those plans underway, and the building can be done by locals is a great step. Thank you. That brings that sort of brings that design into some colour form. Thank you. Next slide. Now, one of the things I was also asked was to say, well, who are your customers? It's good that you've got a plan, you've got competitive advantage. Is anyone going to use it? Now, this is where it's really exciting for us. Yes, they are. And the one group we talk to most often is a really well-known name. So we've got a contract secured with NASA to launch their rockets from our site in 2021. It is a huge deal. This is not just a first for us, this is a first for NASA also. They have never used a purely commercial site to launch their vehicles ever before, anywhere around the world. So can Australia start playing a role? Can we grow to be doing something significant in space and continue to do significant things in space as we have done before? Absolutely. Are we playing a role in it? I'd like to think so. I think this is an absolutely tremendous endeavour. Obviously, it's not just me that stands in front of this and getting it done. There is a small team of us that is working very hard to see that these designs come to fruition. For us, those practical steps have taken place. We've got the approvals. We've been talking to the local people. The land has been cleared, and we're in contract with NASA, now going through the steps to see that the buildings are put in place that they want to see there, and that their launch takes place in just a year's time. Next slide, please. And this was a few months ago, actually, with some of the NASA team out, just making sure that those plans that we're putting together were what they were after. So we'll continue to do that. It's a very practical outcome for us as a nation. This isn't just pie-in-the-sky stuff. We're really seeing it happening. We are going to see NASA rockets launch in a commercial sense from Australia. We're going to play a real role in this, and that growing international market is something we can access. Thank you. I thought I'd give a bit of scale before I closed it out and opened it up to any questions. So that black grant we were talking about 15 metres tall, about the size of a lamppost, that's it there with a NASA team who've launched it elsewhere. I'm hoping in about a year's time that we can show this sort of picture with our Australian team standing underneath it. Very proud for the sorts of things that you felt hopefully when you saw the landing on the moon. Proud of our role growing the space industry for Australia. Thanks very much.
I knew all that. I wish I did. Oh, Carley, that's really good. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in Australia trying to do this? Right?
Yes, the rascals, there are. So we have got, there's a group in Adelaide, Southern Launch, that are looking to establish a site there. Now, if you can kind of imagine that map, oh, here we go, of Australia, their perspective is to do polar launches. So there's still a great number of opportunities for those polar launches. It is a more competed area internationally. There are a lot of other sites that are doing that. But the space industry is growing, more launch sites are needed, and there's a good opportunity for Australia to have a polar launch site as well. In Queensland, we talked about the fact that Blake at Black Sky Aerospace has been launching smaller rockets. He can't do larger launches. It's just not something his site's capable of. But he'll continue to play a really important role as people develop their rockets in Australia and need somewhere to test, and doing suborbital flights as well.
Barry, how are you funded?
How are you funded?
Barry donates to us, and that's fantastic, thank you. We are privately funded, so we have got equity investors, mum and dad investors largely, who have come in early, taking a risk to see that they want to see something happen in space. We recently also secured our first venture capitalist, which was a really positive injection, having a sophisticated investor make that decision and invest in us. Our pathway from here will continue to be, I think, largely private investment, but we'll certainly continue to reach out to government to encourage that as well.
From the Aboriginal Land Council perspective, do they put any, other than time and effort, do they put money in as well?
So the Gumatj Corporation, you're right, there's a mixture of things that happen there. From our side, to start with, we have a few agreements in place with them. One of them is a lease on land that we're paying to use the land. Another one is a priority agreement to see if they've got the skills or capacity work-wise that they'll be able to have a good chance at doing the work that's on the ground. And on the flip side, they've got the opportunity to either invest in the company and take a stake in the company, or do jobs that are involved in the company as well.
Kevin. Sorry, I'm not fine.
You can speak loudly, Kevin.
Yeah, I will, thank you. I was reading an article about launch costs and payloads, and they took the full spectrum right down to some small ones of 20-foot rockets that have got a payload of, I think, 500 kilos. What sort of payload, and their launch cost, I think, was about $3-4 million they were endeavouring to achieve. So where would you fit in that sort of thing?
It's a really complex question, unfortunately. 500 kilos is actually a pretty big vehicle. I'm going to come at it so you get a full picture of this. Now, when you go to launch, people might advertise 60, 70 grand per kilo and you get into space, or a variety thereof, depending on what you mean. Pardon me. With the cost to get into space, some of the things that will vary for you, what services you need. So, for example, if someone wants to bring their rocket to our site, NASA's a great example. They've got their own vehicle. They've got a lot of their own staff as well for some of the complex activities they need to perform. They've got their own payload, their own telescopes, and so they really just need a place to launch from, and some additional services from us. On the flip side, you might have someone at a university who just has a scientific experiment and they need to get it into a rocket. So you've got that full spectrum of, well, what services do you need, and that will increase the price. But also a really important part is, do you get exclusive use? So universities will commonly have a lower price per kilo because they'll put their experiment into a rocket that just goes somewhere into space, and they just care that they're in microgravity. If you want to go to a specific bit of space, a particular angle, a particular height, then you might buy out that whole rocket and you may pay more. So there's a lot of variety. You're right, it really depends on how big is the rocket, how complex is the process, and what services do you need. But commonly people will say, well, you know, we've seen $50,000 to $70,000 per kilo, and we want to bring that back down to $13,000 per kilo. Now, the pressure in the market on that is an interesting point to note, is that a lot of that pressure is going into the people who manufacture the vehicles. Can your rocket do it cheaper? And for us, that's quite fortunate because we're still providing the same services and there's not as much pressure we're seeing on the service price.
Paul Crompton.
Yes, hello, Carley. I just wanted to ask you, you briefly referred to Queensland University before and testing. Now, I believe that Queensland University were one of the leaders in scramjet. And we didn't have the backing in this country, went to America. Are some of the rockets that you use there being used with the scramjet system?
No, the ones that I showed, and let me know if I don't summarise this well. Queensland University in Australia are known for developing a particular type of rocket called a scramjet. It's a very fast vehicle and a really high demand type of vehicle to get right. Now, one of the questions being, are we using a scramjet at our site? We have an agreement with Hypersonics out of Queensland University so that they can use our site as their technology develops, but their technology is not quite there yet. One of the things that we look at on our site is your technical readiness level, and that is how far down that path you are to having a rocket that's reliable. So, for example, when we're talking about the Black Grant, used since the 60s, 98% success rate. The failures that they have had aren't all just dramatic failures that you think of. There might be technical failures. So we're looking at whichever vehicle provider it is, scramjet, Queensland University. There's about 130 around the world of groups that are developing rockets. So how far along are you? Is your rocket reliable yet? In that case, it can do the job and we've got to use it at our site.
Don't join a visit to General Motors, they're leaving. 10 Beetle.
Carley, you mentioned that in your talk that the people were going to be also involved in recovering the payload that comes back to Earth. Where is that? Is that going to be somewhere inland in the desert? How far away from the area? And what happens to the bits of rocket that are also up there that finish? Do they come down or do they burn out?
Thanks very much. So many pieces to your question. Let's start at where things land. It varies depending on what sort of vehicle it is. Let's start at the smaller end when we're talking about Black Sky Aerospace with their solid vehicles that are much smaller. So they'll have a lower altitude and a more nearby drop zone. That might only be a few kilometres away from the site. So that's sort of your near end, and all of your pieces then will come back within a few kilometres of the site. We'll look to recover all of them. For a practical sort of feel for that, you saw that image of Java standing next to a Black Sky vehicle. After that launch, all of the pieces were recovered. The nose cone area had some scratches down it, and that was about it. You did a really good job with it. So all the pieces were recovered well, and in theory you can reuse some of those pieces. When you keep growing the size of your vehicles, then you keep looking at a longer range for them to drop it in. Let's look at the NASA example. We actually haven't got their landing zones yet to be able to know exactly where they'll land, but you could see within a very practical kind of concept of saying 200 to 400 kilometres downrange. Now, for a launch, you can say in our site you can land onto land, or you can look to go out to water. They're the two options for us. For NASA, I expect that they'll look to go to land because the equipment's so sensitive they probably won't want to land it in water. Does that go to addressing your question well? Great. Anything left there that I didn't hit?
Sorry?
Did I miss anything for you?
No. One last question, if I may. Is your station, your launch station, close to Go on the peninsula there?
Have you been to Go?
Yes, I have.
Fantastic. When did you go?
Oh, a lot of years ago, but it was to do with the aluminium industry.
I thought I'd heard that there's someone that was linked to the alumina industry or aluminium. Were you at the refinery site or the mining site?
Yes, at the refinery, which is closing down. I read recently that it's pretty much in mothballs now. How far away is it from your station? Really
close by. So, considering you're familiar with the site, and just for a bit of a feel for everyone else, Matt probably won't do it. If you were to position, let's try it anyway, your refinery, if we're over any side, your refinery is just about here. We're about 25 kilometres away from the refinery view, back down south and southwest of the refinery. And my directions are terrible actually, but so we're fairly close to the refinery. It's a really interesting point you raised. So in East Island land, one of the main industries for a long time has been mining and refining bauxite into aluminium. The refinery has shut down and it's been decommissioned now, and mining has about a 10-year span left on it. So the whole region is looking to say, well, what comes next? And part of our conversation in the region is to say, well, we're not going to replace mining. We're a small venture, a small team, and we're going to take small steps into our growth. But it certainly is something that can inspire the local community and add a very interesting flavour to what's happening in East Island land into the future.
Jeff?
Thanks, Carley. How much of your market is going to be orbital customers? What are they doing? And how much suborbital, what those applications are? Orbital, my understanding is that the rocket or the satellite will complete at least an orbit of the Earth.
You passed the test.
So the question being, how much of the market for us is suborbital, going in that arc, and how much of it goes out to space and then orbits around the Earth at least once? And usually that's a satellite, and will often be the payload there. For us in the near term, we'll start with suborbital most heavily because it's a smaller infrastructure build for us, and then look to move as quickly as possible into orbital with lower Earth orbit and then geo being opportunities for us. So the orbital market in hopefully not too long a time will actually be the much more significant contributor to our bottom line. Yeah.
Jim Duggan?
As I understand it, Richard Branson proposes to launch from a purpose-built aircraft, and which I would have thought offered significant advantages because it's travelling at high altitude and travelling at significant speed. Is there any risk of your ground launching being undercut by that sort of launch, which, as I say, I would have thought offered a significant advantage?
These questions are great. Not in the near term for a number of reasons. The site that we've got is a brilliant site for a number of reasons, and one of them is that it's able to accommodate a range of different technologies. Now, when it comes to launch, so just to go back a step, Richard Branson has two different avenues that he's looking at. One is the commercial tourism side that we saw that ship for, and the other is Virgin Orbit, and that's specifically looking at about a 300 kilogram payload that is orbital most likely. And what you're looking at there is a rocket that's launched from the underside of a Boeing aircraft wing. The advantages of that, you're right, is that you can go to an airport, so existing infrastructure, fly out of that airport, reach an altitude. There's so much diversity in how you can then provide to a customer where do you want to go, what angle do you want to hit, what height do you want to hit. So there's a lot of opportunity that Virgin provides. They currently have one vehicle only. It's in testing, and it's got the 300 kilo payload limit at the moment for what they can lift. So those are some of the limitations on what they provide. And even if they were to have a full fleet at 300 kilos, they're not going to absorb all of the market. So there will be heavier payloads that are lifted, 500 kilos, 1,000 kilos that they just can't do yet. So Virgin is more of an opportunity to say, well, actually there's a runway right nearby our launch site. So if we're talking to customers generally, we understand the market, the safety requirements. Is that something that we could see happen from Australia, Mooreboy, at some point? And that's an ongoing discussion.
Anyone? One more for Carley? Barry. Short question.
Barry. Taking your prime objectives in with this enterprise, which is private enterprise, right? What responsibilities do you have with respect to our national authority, and for that matter, the US and anybody else that's doing this either as a private organisation or as a national organisation? And how do you have to cooperate with them or get permission?
How to summarise? So nationally, we have state authorities that we need to go through. Environmental regulation, for example, will be a state authority-based NT EPA. Then to launch past the carbon line, we'll have to work with the Australian Space Agency, who regulates to say, well, is your site appropriate, and is the launch of each launch that you're planning appropriate. So we need to seek permission for each launch to be legally undertaken and approval from the federal agency for that to take place. In granting that federal approval at a national level, there are a range of different departments that come in to have a say around, ACMA, our radio frequency regulation, have we managed that well? So that there are a range of different checkpoints at the national level to see that you're legally launching. At an international level, there is the United Nations in particular, and there are a series of different protocols, some that Australia is signed up to and some that we're not, that guide behaviour around access to space, and also debris management, for example, and what we do going out into space. So if you're looking at it really simplistically, if you're a nation that is not looking to adhere to those regulations and have ongoing strong trade relations, then in theory you could launch something and not adhere to any of those regulations. For us as a commercial entity in Australia that's looking to meet law abiding and continue to have a sustainable future, there are checks and balances from the state level through to the federal level and international.
Are you likely to be used as a subcontractor and the external national?
We'd certainly look at that as an opportunity. We've spoken to our federal agencies and said, look, if you're launching a satellite and you're going to do that offshore, why would you do it offshore if there's an opportunity in Australia? It's one of the considerations nationally is to talk about sovereign capability and the fact that when you're going offshore with some of the key technologies, you lose some of the control of that. So the ability to have the satellites manufactured in Australia, we've got a growing industry around that. The vehicles manufactured potentially in Australia as well, once again a growing industry there, and then launched from Australia is something that's of interest to our national agencies. But I think the steps that we're taking with NASA will really demonstrate that we've got the capacity to fulfill that.
Thank you.
Or one quick one, Ken.
Carley, how did you get to the position you're in?
Well, it's a long story now.
I know. There is no, I have a laugh about this because there's no sort of standard pathway that you say to a young girl, go and take these 3 courses and you'll run a spaceport. And if you look internationally, there aren't many spaceports that are active in doing the orbital launches actively right now. And if you look at those CEOs and how many are female, very small number, once again, so that there's no sort of standard pathway to follow. However, the pathway that I took was that I have a great passion for technology, international trade, community development, and I've done a lot of economic development previously. So I've worked in transitioning economies, for example, to understand how workforces change, and what that gave me was an understanding not just of how economies change and how trade relations work, but also of things right from your community concerns into regulation processes and managing a full suite of activities that link really commercial enterprise through to those different areas of society. And that provided me with a good opportunity to smooth a pathway for the absolutely brilliant team that I have that have a great depth of understanding around space and the technologies of space and launch.
So it was just a diploma in how to run a spaceport. Just like
online in 2 days.
Scott's Business College. Peter Longcrane, I think you've been delegated.
That was very interesting. Right. Carley, on behalf of the Private Club, thank you for giving us an insight into what you're doing and your corporation. It was, I thought it was jolly interesting, although I don't know anything about it.
I don't know anything about the space industry, but I do a little bit now, but it was jolly interesting. I did really enjoy it, thank you. And on behalf of the Progress Club, we'd like you to accept this small token of our appreciation. Yeah.
I know you have a line. I don't know if people like things, but I have an Australian Space Agency pin. If there's anyone that would like that, feel free to come up in just a moment. We have a little NASA pin because we're working with them so closely. We don't have an ELA pin just yet. A Space Agency sticker, in case any of you family or friends or yourself would like one. But also, it's run out of juice here, but if we open this up when you come up and have a chat to me, this is technically meant to be, it's a April Fool's Day delivery, but it's also labelled as the smell of space. And so apparently when astronauts had come back in from trekking around outside in space, there was a smell that was associated with their re-entry, which was a mixture of burning meat and metals. So it's not a pleasant smell. They made it a little bit more pleasant and put it into these little bottles and made it available at different space events that I've been to. So if you want to open it up and have a sniff or something that may be similar to the smell of space, please do so. Thank you.
Or maybe someone that's been in space for 340 days.
You don't know what the smell's going to be. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much, Carley. Before I close, next month's meeting is up in the air again in terms of our guest speaker next month is all about, Carley's talking about powered flight and rockets and things like that. Next month we're talking about